Hey everyone, Andrew here, and today I'm going to be doing something that I've been wanting to do for a little bit. So, about 2 years ago I did a video where I compared the TV shows Camelot and Merlin, which were both based off of, King Arthur myth and this, that, and the other. And I was comparing them and seeing what each of them did and which did better and my thoughts on that. And I've been wanting to do another comparison video like that for a little while, trying to find a good subject for it. I didn't want to do anything super obvious, so I kind of ended up going the extreme opposite. The two that I picked are seemingly have very little actually in common, but when you really look at them and what they've done and what happened to them, they have a lot more in common than you would suspect. Today I will be comparing the franchises of The Highlander and The Crow. Now, these are both series about people of supernatural origins. Started out as normal people, then died and became this new, more powerful version of them. In Highlander, they are an immortal who basically gains enhanced strength and speed and travels looking for other immortals so they can fight to the death, and then eventually there will be only one who has all of the powers that are imaginable under their disposal. And then The Crow is about someone who dies a horrific death, and usually alongside someone who was innocent, and then comes back through the power of a mystic crow who then seeks out revenge and justice against said wrongdoers who murdered them. There are also ones where the first film is extremely successful and really popular and still strong and respected to this day. They are also a franchise where every single one of the film sequels are not good to, oh god, no. Like, some of them are completely trash. They are also ones that had television spin-offs, and the television spin-offs are surprisingly good. So there are some little bits in common with this. So yeah, I'm going to break down the first two movies and my thoughts on them and which I think worked better. Then I'm going to talk about the sequels, and then I'm going to talk about the television series, and then I'm going to just talk about my thoughts on everything overall. So, starting with the films, let's start out with the one that came out first, which is Highlander.
There can be only one.
Here we are! It came out in 1986. It's based off an original story by a young Gregory Whiten. It stars Christopher Lambert as Connor MacLeod, a Scottish Highlander who from the 1600s who got killed in a battle by the enemy soldier known as the Kurgan, but MacLeod manages to revive and becomes this immortal being.
From another time comes a man of great power.
He befriends a man named Juan Ramirez, played by Sean Connery.
You cannot die, MacLeod.
Who is a swordsman from Spain, but we find out that he is also an immortal, and is actually an ancient Egyptian that has been around for over 1,000 years. And he is in Scotland chasing down this dangerous immortal called the Kurgan. And Ramirez agrees to train MacLeod on how to fight and how to deal with other immortals. That eventually there will be this event called the Quickening, where the last of the immortals will get together and they will fight, and the last immortal standing will gain all of their powers and become this new super powerful being. The Kurgan shows up while MacLeod is out and kills Ramirez, and then MacLeod takes Ramirez's sword and vows to get, justice for his friend, and goes out and trains and becomes more powerful. Now, in the modern day, which would be 1985 for this film,
a man uncertain of his future.
What you got here, Brenda, is a guy who's been creeping around since at least 1700.
MacLeod has become one of the last remaining immortals, It's basically him and the Kurgan shows up in New York.
What can you tell me about a 7-foot lunatic hacking away with a broadsword at 1 o'clock in the morning, New York City, 1985?
Not much.
To face him and threatens the woman that McCloud has been starting to get close to, who's a journalist that was figuring out, oh, you've been here and here and here, and your fingerprints have been found everywhere, and this, that, and the other. And McCloud and the Kurgan fight. McCloud kills Kurgan, gains his power, and then becomes this new super-powered immortal that has the ability to read thoughts and is like, now I can save humanity and bring them peace. And that's how the film ends. And it's a really good film that has moments of greatness. Like, it also has moments that are a bit hard to follow and understand. Like, most of the stuff in the past about, you know, him being trained and learning all this stuff, that stuff works, and then a lot of the modern day stuff just does not work well in this film. It doesn't help that this is a really oddly put together and oddly casted film. Like, you have Christopher Lambert as a Scotsman from the 1500s. So you got a French man playing a Scotsman. You have the Scottish man playing an ancient Egyptian with a Spanish name, wielding a katana from Japan, despite the fact that that sword wouldn't exist for like another 100 years or something. Christopher Lambert is very flat in this. Like, he has a little bit of a personality, but you get the feeling that this really isn't comfortable for him, especially using English, which was not his first language. And I don't think this was his first English film, but it was very early in his career.
I am Conor MacLeod of the Clan MacLeod. I was born in 1518 in the village of Glenfinnan on the shores of Loch Sheen. I am immortal.
Like, but it has some great stuff in it. Like, Ramirez, Sean Connery is absolutely amazing in this, and Clancy Brown is the Kurgan, and if you don't recognize the name, you would definitely recognize the voice.
His greatest challenge.
You will always be weaker than I.
And because he's a lot of characters and a lot of stuff. Like, if you've watched an animated thing, you've probably heard Clancy Brown's voice at some point.
In the end, there can be only one.
Moving on to The Crow. Now, The Crow is based off a comic by James O'Barr, of the same name, and it stars Brandon Lee as Eric Draven.
When someone's dead, they can't come back, can they?
Eric Draven is a rock musician who one night watches a bunch of gangsters basically rape and then murder his wife, and then he is thrown out of a window and killed. A year later, he awakens in a graveyard, and there's this crow around him that has bestowed on him special immortal abilities. So he is basically immortal and can't die, but his powers are a bit iffy. They work when they want to, and sometimes they don't work as well. And if anything happens to the bird, he also gets injured. And he puts on this clown kind of makeup that's his old rock star makeup, but done more darkly and more dangerously. And
Crow could bring that soul back to put the wrong things right.
and kills his way through the entire gang of people.
Is that gasoline I smell?
So it gets to the point where like the only people left are the main villain, Top Dollar, and his mistress, who is a voodoo priestess.
Crow is his link between the land of the living and the realm of the dead.
And they try to capture the physical crow and use it to their advantage, but Eric Draven, with the help of his friends, manages to get the better of them and then kills both of them. And then he goes to the graveyard to sit by his wife's grave and travels back into the spirit world to be reunited with her once again. This is a film that is decent in its ideas, but its execution makes it outstanding, especially its performance from the star Brandon Lee. Like, he just owns this movie. This movie is such a vehicle for this person.
You're all going to die.
And it is a shame that it also led to his tragic young death. And I went through and I looked through the history of what happened and this and that and the other, and basically it was like the production didn't spend the money to get the really good safe bullets, so they made their own bullets that were supposed to be safe. And then the person who was in charge of those bullets and making sure they were safe and making sure the right ones were in the right things went home early that day. And so they just had one of the props people do it. And yeah, it's a tragedy. It is a horrific tragedy that should have never happened. The only good that came from it was that Hollywood had to double down and become more safe and more protective and more cautious for its actors and its performers. But yeah, the passing of Brandon Lee is a huge, saddening loss, because I legitimately think this film would have pushed him into the stratosphere. Like, he would have been the level of Jean-Claude Van Damme and Jackie Chan and Jet Li in the 90s. Like, he would have been this mega star of a performer. And unfortunately, he got the same fate of his dad, as passing away too soon. Now, if I'm comparing the two films, first the Highlander versus the Crow, which is the better film, I'm like, this is a toss-up. This one could really go to either of them. It's really kind of your preferences and your choices. I would lean towards The Crow because I think it is great film with really great ideas and a really great execution, whereas The Highlander has great ideas and the execution is a little bit less than ideal. Part of it is the leads, especially of Christopher Lambert as MacLeod. Like, he clearly wasn't particularly comfortable speaking that much English, and it just doesn't resonate well. He comes off a bit wooden and a bit hollow, which is really sad because everyone around him is kind of amazing, and then he's just kind of there for the film. Whereas Brandon Lee is the driving force of this film and makes it amazing. And I'm really glad there was at least enough footage of him to finish this film and put it together and to make something out of it. And it is very much a product of its time, but it still has stuff about it that I deem to be important and interesting and worth giving a look-see if you haven't seen it. But both films are amazing and great for what they are and are a blast to watch. So, like I said, I lean towards The Crow. If you lean towards The Highlander, I 100% understand. Then we get into the sequels, and oh boy. Woo, we are in for some terribleness. Because first up, we have Highlander 2, The Quickening.
In all their centuries on Earth, nothing could have prepared them for The Quickening. Highlander 2, The Quickening.
Jeez Louise, this film is bad. Like, so, because here's the thing. The writers of the original Highlander wrote themselves into a corner. They didn't know, they basically had that the Quickening happened, that MacLeod gained all the power, and that's like, well, what do? There's no more immortals for him to fight. We can't do a sequel. And my solutions to this would have been either you do prequels, where you get to see Christopher Lambert in different time periods dealing with different problems, and that could have been really interesting and a really creative way to keep the story going. Or you just pretend that they weren't the last ones and that there's more others out there. I never took the original as it being like the be all end all. Like, I was always like, there could have been more, He just may have gotten to a point where his level seemed like he was the most powerful, but there might have been someone just as powerful or most, or the writer and the director of this chose to go to the extreme opposite, like as far removed from the original as possible. Basically, the director decided, I want creative control, and I want to do something that is nothing like the Highlander. And so he did. So, first off, this film takes place in the year 2024.
Somewhere in the future,
So next year, according to this, in the film, the ozone layer has been destroyed, and now humans are living in cities under shields.
There simply isn't enough energy on the planet to take down the shield without killing us all.
The world is dying, McCloud. The shield had to come down.
The shields were invented by Connor McCloud as an artificial ozone layer to keep everything that. And because Connor McCloud went through the quickening and gained all these powers, he turned into a mortal and is now on the verge of death. Like, he is just about to die of old age. And the villain of the film, played by Michael Ironside, is like, well, I can't, McCloud is the only threat that I have to my plan. Through him, we also find out that the, all of the immortals are aliens from another planet, or from Earth in the far distant past, depending on which cut of the film you watch. But either way, it's this really insane thing. Like, they were sent through time to correct the future, and it's like, what? And then Michael Ironside's like, I need to stop McCloud. He's the only person that could even possibly become a threat to me. So he sent 2 assassins to go kill him.
Find McCloud and kill him.
Ends up backfiring horribly because McCloud uses them to gain his powers back and gain his youth and becomes his young immortal self again. And this is one of those ones where you can look at the villain's plan and you're like, you idiot. He was on his deathbed. If you had waited like a couple days, a week, 2 weeks, a month at most, he would have been dead and your plan would have come to fruition. There was literally no reason to do this. And then, after gaining back his powers, McCloud uses his powers to resurrect Sean Connery's Ramirez. And he awakens in the castle that he died in, which is now a Shakespeare theater. And then he goes and hops on a plane and travels to New York, all the while rather nonplussed by the entire, 500 years in the future, and people are in flying vehicles now. He's just kind of like, oh, interesting.
Rather glad the magic works.
The whole thing becomes about having to stop the domes because they are being used for, I don't even know what. It's so bad. Like, the entire film just completely unravels within like the first 30 minutes. It just goes completely down the drain and you're just like, what the heck? This does lead to that interesting thing of it is to see what would happen if you give someone too much creative control. And then, they tried to fix it, and so they've made a, shorter cut, theatrical cut, and kicked him out of the thing and tried to make that different. And then there's also the director's cut called the Renegade Cut, which is supposedly better, but I do not believe so from what I know and what I've seen. But yeah, it's a film that is considered one of the worst films ever made, and it is. It is absolutely terrible. Like, there are moments of fun, and then everything else is just dreadfully bad. Like, oof. Not a fun watch in any way for me. Then you have Highlander 3.
Highlander The Final Dimension.
So Highlander 3, The Sorcerer, or Final Dimension, depending, or Final Conflict, depending on your region. So, after the events of Highlander 2, what did they choose to do? They retconned Highlander 2 out of existence. And then went with my idea, which is like, oh no, there was another immortal alive. His name was Kane. He was locked in a underground cave for 400 years or something.
But the ultimate evil has found him.
His name is Kane. Highlander's out there somewhere, and he owes me 400 years.
One is a master of the sword, the other a master of illusion.
Some say he's the devil himself.
But even he isn't really good in it, so yeah, it's pretty bad. We move on to Highlander 4 Endgame.
Highlander Endgame.
Which tied into the television show, because it has two leads. You have Connor MacLeod, and then you also have a descendant / cousin of Connor MacLeod named Duncan MacLeod, played by Adrian Paul.
Fight for one.
Neither one of us can beat him alone.
Has now become a battle two must face.
You and Connor are like brothers.
Who is the lead immortal from the television show, which I will talk about eventually. And they have to team up to fight this uber-powered enemy named Jacob Kell, who is an immortal who is basically stronger than the two of them combined.
A supernatural enemy has grown too strong for any immortal to face alone.
So they've come to the realization and figure out one of us has to steal the other one's power. That's the only way we even stand a chance of this. So they fight to the death.
No! We're not doing this, Connor!
Oh, yes, we're doing this.
And Duncan MacLeod wins and kills Connor MacLeod. So the television show character kills the film character and takes over as the lead.
I love you, Connor.
This one isn't awful. It's actually decent. It has some good stuff in it. I do respect them for being ballsy enough and brave enough to kill off freaking Christopher Lambert's lead character, considering the only reason people probably went to watch this was because of that character. But I do respect it. It is an interesting choice and an interesting option. It's not amazing film. It's also a bit hard to follow, especially in the beginning, but it gets better towards the end. And then this led to another sequel starring Duncan MacLeod called The Source.
One of us has to die. Come on.
And that one is an incoherent mess of a film that I'm not even going to bother breaking down because I don't think I could. Like, it's just incoherent, terribly shot. Like, so this was premiered on the Sci-Fi Channel direct-to-video film. So it's of an extremely low quality. And I like Sci-Fi Channel, and I like a lot of the stuff that they produce. They're not great when it comes to movies. I'm sorry. Like, when the most successful Sci-Fi Channel movie out there is the Sharknado series, something's wrong with the way you make films.
What are you?
I'm the Guardian.
Like, it is badly shot, badly edited, badly colored, badly written, badly done. There is not a single remotely redeemable thing I saw in the entire freaking movie. Like, I absolute garbage from the first second. It's awful, and I'm glad they stopped. There is also a sixth film, which is an anime version of the Highlander.
Vengeance. There can be only one. Highlander, the search for vengeance.
I haven't seen it. I have no plans to see it, so let me know in the comments if it's what it's about and if it's any good. It's not important for what this little thing is. So yeah, you have god awful, just the first one again, okay, god awful. Then we move on to The Crow, and The Crow, okay, so first off we have The Crow, City of Angels.
The Crow, City of Angels.
This one follows basically a mechanic named Ash Corvin, who him and his 8-year-old son watch a gang murder this drug dealer, and then the gang kills and murders this father and son. And then he resurrects on All Saints Day to get revenge on the gang leaders. And it's like an incredibly crappy version of the first one. Like, it's poorly shot, it's poorly put together, it's incoherent, it's just... One of the things you'll find with the Crow franchise is that they kept having to do the clown makeup stuff, and it never really makes sense past the first one. Like, the first one, it's like, it was explained that he was a rock and roll star, and this was his persona, and that was him, you know, becoming something for them to fear, whereas this one, it's like he's an artist, maybe, and he puts it on.
And another has been chosen.
Just doesn't have the right mood or the energy. It's just stunningly awful, just absolutely awful. And supposedly, like, there's a director's cut of this that is a lot easier to understand and a lot easier to follow. I don't think so. I'm like, it might be, but it's an incoherent mess from start to finish, and it is up there with The Quickening and The Source as being absolutely terrible. Then you have The Crow, Salvation.
Eric Mabius, Kirsten Dunst. The Crow, Salvation.
Alex Corvus is sentenced to death row for murdering his girlfriend when she was actually murdered by other people.
When a young man is wrongfully accused of murder.
And he's killed in the electric chair.
Alexander Frederick Corvus, do you have any last words? I love Lauren.
And then wakes up in the morgue with the Crow powers, and now his mask is more permanently inset, like it's the scarring from the electric chair that left on him. And he goes on a killing spree, and a lot of the people that were behind the death were cops, so he goes against a bunch of dirty cops.
What do you want?
I want to know why.
I can't be alive, not without you.
And this film is just the first one again, but not as bad as the second, but nowhere near as good as the first. It's just a really watered down, uninteresting version of the first one. It has Eric Mabius as the lead, who I really like. He was the boss in Ugly Betty, and he's the lead guy in Sign, Seal, Deliver franchise on Hallmark. And he's a really good actor, but it's just, he's fine at this. And it just is a bit weird and a bit off. His performance is kind of a little bit all over the place. It's just either too muted or too crazy, depending on the scene. And it's just the first one again, but more poorly done. But this one is just watchable. It's not bad. It's just it's watchable. And then you have The Crow, Wicked Prayer, starring Edward Furlong as Jimmy Servo, a parolee who's living in a mobile home over near an Aztec reservation. he's dating one of the local native girls, and his old friend has just escaped prison with his fiance. So his friend is Luke Death Crash and Lola Bine, played by David Boreanaz and Tara Reid. And basically, they are Satan worshippers, and they are trying to bring about the Antichrist. So they travel into the reservation, they kill Jimmy's girlfriend in front of him, and they kill Jimmy, but his girlfriend uses the last of her life energy to resurrect Jimmy as the Crow, because the Crow is somehow tied into this reservation's belief system. And Jimmy Dins proceeds to spend the entire movie just kind of complaining about being alive. Like, I'd rather be dead. I hate this. I just want to go on. Why did you resurrect me? And it's all kind of in that tone. And
didn't we kill that guy?
This is a film that is so bad, it actually kind of swings around to being actually kind of good. Like, not for Edward Furlong. Edward Furlong is pretty freaking terrible in this. But David Boreanaz is having a blast, and he is chewing the scenery as hard as he can. Like, just as over the top and loud and as big as he can. He is just full on insane, laughing at everything, crazy guy.
Call me Lucifer. Do you really want to fucking dance? Come on here, tiger. Feeding time.
He's trying to to have the devil possess him and take over his body, and then it does, and then it's a demon possessed Angelus versus Eddie Furlong in a crow makeup. Like, it's so bad, and yet it's actually really entertaining. Like, I know people, like, a lot of people is like, this is the worst of the Crow sequels. Honestly, this is my favorite of the Crow sequels. Like, it's the only one I find that's really worth watching. Like, it's so bad, but it's entertaining. But I enjoyed it. I had a good time watching it, which is more than I can say for either of the other two, and half of the freaking Highlander ones. So, comparing the two, which had the better sequels? Well, let's see. Terrible, meh, okay, to terrible. And then you had terrible, meh, so terrible it's actually kind of good. So, it's hard to say which one have the better sequels. I'm going to lean towards the Highlander, though, because at least 3 and 4 are watchable and kind of okay and kind of interesting. They are better than any of the Crows by a wide margin. Both of these also had a television show based off of them. And surprisingly, both of the television shows are actually pretty good. You had Highlander the series, which they creatively named Highlander the series, and that starred Duncan MacLeod, played by Adrian Paul.
He is immortal. Born in the Highlands of Scotland 400 years ago, he is not alone. In the end, there can be only one. He is Duncan MacLeod, the Highlander.
And he is the cousin descendant of Connor MacLeod from the original series. And it's just basically him going through life, coming across these odd events, figuring out that there's an immortal somewhere behind it, going in there, fighting the immortal, killing them, and gaining their powers. It's very formulaic, but it has the right attitude and the right ideas, and it has some creativity with it. Like, you get a nice wide range of history and different stories and different arcs. It gets a bit more supernaturally than even the films did. It is legitimately as good, arguably maybe even better than the original film. And it has some really good stuff with it. And it was interesting enough that they even did a spin-off show based off one of the characters called The Raven.
She is immortal. 1,000 years old. And she cannot die.
Which is also a decently made show. There's also a kids animated show, but I'm not going to talk about that because I've never seen it and I've never heard anyone talk about it. And there's no Crow animated kids show. So.
A world, but soon an immortal will come to confront him. His name is Quentin MacLeod. He is the Highlander.
Then you have the Crow television show, which was called Crow's Stairway to Heaven. And interestingly enough, this one brought back the Eric Draven character from the first film. In fact, it retells his story. Like, the first episodes are basically the exact same kind of thing as the movie, but done with a TV rating budget. But the difference is once Eric got his revenge and took out all of the bad people, he didn't get to die and go back to the afterlife. That because he murdered people and gave into his darker instincts, he is now cursed to walk the earth until he can redeem himself by saving people and setting things right that went wrong and making the world a better place. And it becomes very much a superhero thing because that whole clown crow makeup that he wears, like, this one explains that anytime his crow powers really kick in, that just appears.
Hey, I'm talking to you. Well, apparently you got my attention. He looks like a clown. Not a clown, just another rube.
And actually is a really good way of keeping that idea in without it being too ridiculous or stupid like they did with some of the others where the skin was decaying and all that. It's like, no, it's literally how the power is represented. And although I will say with this, the show definitely played up the whole my powers work, except when they don't. Because more than a few times he went to go fight the bad guy in the middle of the film and the bad guy just shoots him and he just falls over dead and then gets up like a half hour later like, ow, and then heals. Whereas later he'll fight the same guy will shoot him, but now because it's the end of the show, he can just take the bullet and he just stops the bad guy. So, yeah, the crow powers are a bit all over the place. The show itself is really kind of good. It's got a great cast. It had Mark Dacascos.
Surprise!
You're alive.
Let's not get technical. Were you just getting comfortable, or would you like to...
Yeah, I would.
It has a really good ideas, really good concept. I like the story. I like the way it's shot. I will say, though, it's only one season, and it does start to lose speed and stamina as the season goes on. Like, they try to keep it going, but it's kind of clear that they necessarily didn't have a great idea of what to do for later on as the show went on. It just kind of started becoming the same episodes again and again, which is not a great thing to have from a show that's one season and only 22 episodes. Like, you shouldn't be feeling that it's too repetitive, but it has a little bit of that. So yeah, if I'm comparing the television shows and which ones worked and which ones didn't and which one was the better, I have to give it to the Highlander show, because the Highlander show had multiple seasons and got to points where it was as good, if not better, than the source material it came from. Whereas the Crow's Stairway to Heaven is good. It's definitely better than all of the movie sequels, but it's not quite up to par of the original. And now looking at the series as overall, which one works, which one didn't, which one is better, I can see arguments for both. Like, I would argue that the first Crow film is better than almost anything in the Highlander franchise. Almost. But I would say overall there are more and better things with the Highlander than there is with the Crow. With the Crow you get one great film and one really good television show and then a lot of garbage. Whereas with the other one you get a good film, a great television show, an okay film, a pretty good film, and and then garbage. But you at least have a little bit more on the positive side. But that's just my opinion. What do you all think? Do you like these series? Do you dislike these series? Do you like Highlander more? Do you like Crow more? Have you seen the television shows for these? Let me know in the comments below. One of the things I did find out that was kind of interesting, these are both franchises that are on the verge of getting rebooted. The Highlander one, there's not a lot of details on it right now. They haven't really done much with it, but I do know Henry Cavill's been cast in it to play the lead. Whether or not he will be Connor McLeod is up in the air, but if that ever actually makes it through, that would be interesting to see. And then you have The Crow, which, from the sounds of it, is already done filming and should be coming out momentarily. It's like it was filmed and put together, and it stars Bill Skarsgård as Draven. And I'm a little bit more wary of this one because I like Bill Skarsgård. I think he does good performances. I'm not 100% certain I want to see him as Draven, or that he could really pull that off. And it was also filmed in the Czech Republic, which it makes me a little worried. If I was going to talk about which ones should get rebooted and which ones I think would work and which ones wouldn't, you can reboot either of them. I think with The Crow though, you need a good, strong, perfect lead for this. You need someone who really encapsulates this character, this dark, brooding, kind of cool, kind of scary, kind of threatening person. And honestly, I would not even think Brandon Lee would necessarily fall under this, but he did such a good job that literally you will only ever be comparing to him, and that is such a hard performance to top. And I don't know of many actors nowadays who could really do it. But the Highlander, I do think we could remake the Highlander and make a good version of the Highlander. I think it would work better though if we did it as a television show. Let's reboot the television show. Let's give it a decent budget. Let's give it something close to, but maybe not quite as much as Game of Thrones. Really let it go full hog. Let us have real big flashbacks in the past. You can let it be non-linear. Have it just be a bunch of stories from all throughout time. There's a lot of things you could really do with this that I think would work really well. But that's just my thoughts. Let me know what you all think. Happy watching, happy reading. I will see you all next time. Bye.
There can be only one.
Highlander, there can be only one.
Here we are!